I love historical fiction. I really, really do. I make no secret of it. I have talked about it in the past. Historical fiction, especially British historical fiction, represents one of my most beloved genres. Science fiction, fantasy, any Japanese or Korean or Argentinian literature at all, and historical fiction. I really adore it. Two pieces. And recently I've read a whole bunch of new historical fiction, some of which I've already done dedicated videos on that you can go watch, others I have not mentioned at all and I really want to bring up now. By the way, while I'm on the subject, the reason my bookshelf looks like this is because most of the pretty hardbacks I have behind me are the historical fiction I want to talk about, and so I had to get them off the shelf, and this is what we're left with. So, let's talk about some great historical fiction, all written by women, that I want to talk about. First up is a brand new book at the time of recording, The Silence of Shahrazad. This is written by Daphne Suman, and it's translated from Turkish by Betsy Gürskal. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is a Turkish novel. Daphne Suman was born in Istanbul, and this is about the fall of the Ottoman Empire. This is a brand new book for 2021. It is in gorgeous hardcover with a stunning detail on the front, and it had me captured from the beginning, even though it actually starts as a pretty slow burn for the first 100 pages, and then it escalates and darkens in a very tremendous and almost shocking way. It's difficult to say what The Silence of Shahrazad is actually about, because it is an enormous book with a huge cast of characters and perspectives that are flitted between almost constantly in a dizzying way. But it is set in the early 20th century in Turkey during the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Specifically, it's set in a city that no longer exists because it burned to the ground. And that city is called Smyrna. Not sure that's how it's pronounced, but that's how I've been saying it, Smyrna. And Smyrna was, as this book says it, a paradise. Daphne Suman creates this Garden of Eden kind of city, this paradise on earth, this pearl of the East, a pearl of the Ottoman Empire, this perfect, liberal, multicultural city in Turkey, a place where Christians, Jews, Muslims, and other types of people all coexist in different districts and quarters, trading with each other, drinking with each other, spending time in coffee houses together, and it's perfect, it's beautiful, it's sunny, it's exotic, it's gorgeous, and it's full of people from France and Britain who've come to trade. It's full of Indians and Turks and Greeks, people from everywhere, all coming together in this gorgeous cultural melting pot. It's a paradise until it isn't. The book also has an enormous cast of characters. As I said, the titular protagonist is Shahrazad, but for a large chunk of the book, Shahrazad doesn't exist. The book begins instead with her mother. Her name is Edith, and she is the daughter of a woman called Juliet. They live a very privileged life in Smyrna, and very quickly Edith finds out that she has inherited a house from her real father. Her father that she thought was her father, the man who raised her, is dead, and now this Greek guy who she never knew has also died and left her this house and this fortune. Edith moves into this house. Shortly after, she meets this very charming Indian man who is actually a spy for the British Empire, and he is one of our key core protagonists. The two of them enter a very, very long relationship, and then the Ottoman Empire falls and the Greeks arrive at the shores of Smyrna. And I don't really want to talk any more about it because so much happens, and it's actually kind of difficult to talk about because of the way that it flits back and forth in time between different years, different characters' perspectives, different situations and goings on. It's moving from 1900 to 1920, 1925 and beyond. It covers quite a lot of ground in the first half of the 20th century, all centered around this city and what happens to it, and what happens to the people within it. And it never gets boring because we are constantly flitting between these characters and their perspectives. These people are from different religions, races, countries, classes, neighborhoods, and all the while their city is breathing its last breath. The Animals at Lockwood Manor. This is a piece of British historical fiction by Jane Healey. Her second book, I think it's called The Ophelia Girls, has just come out, and I might get it, I don't know, we'll see. I didn't love this book, but I liked it enough to mention it here. I do think it is worth reading. It's just not quite as good as some of the other books that I'll get to in a sec, but I have it and I want to talk about it. The Animals at Lockwood Manor tells the story of a protagonist who is a museum curator, and at the start of World War II, all of the animals in the Natural History Museum have to be moved to an estate, to this fancy country estate where they will be safe from the Blitz and any bombings and any scary things that happened during the war, and so our protagonist goes with them to continue to curate them and keep them safe while she's there. But this house is owned by a family. You have a father who is a very, very grumpy, horrible man, and his daughter who is grieving and depressed and eccentric in her own way. And it's really about the relationship between this daughter and our museum curator. The book borrows heavily from the themes, events, and tone of books like Jane Eyre and the works of Shirley Jackson, Daphne du Maurier. It's got that gothic tone to it. It's a very Bronte-esque kind of a gothic story, but it's still a great story in its own right. If you are a fan of those books, you are likely to get something out of this, or you're likely to think it's too derivative. I'm not sure. I lean towards feeling like it was a bit derivative, and it never had much of an emotional impact, but it's still a really enjoyable story because I like the world, I like the people enough. I enjoy historical fiction, especially British historical fiction by women, to such a point that I'm willing to read a book that's only okay, as long as I can enjoy it and escape into its world for a little while, which is exactly what I did with The Animals at Lockwood Manor. This is a debut novel by Lucy Holland, Sister Song. Most historical fiction that I enjoy and read on a regular basis is usually by British women and set in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, but this is set way before that. This is a medieval British novel with the Saxons knocking at the gates of its setting, and it's about 3 siblings, 2 daughters and a 3rd sibling who is progressively realizing that they are a trans man. And they have a father who is a king of a small region of Britain who are being threatened by a Saxon invasion. There is magic, there is sorcery, there is subterfuge and politics going on in the background, but it's also kind of a family drama first and foremost. And our protagonist, who is a trans man, is absolutely the most interesting character here, but all 3 of them are going on an interesting journey in some way. The trans representation here was really important to me personally, but beyond that, it's still a really fantastic piece of historical fiction, and what makes it so refreshing as a piece of historical fiction is that it's a medieval book rather than something that's set during the Victorian period, the Industrial Revolution, the Georgian period. We see that all the time, and I really enjoy it. I never get sick of it. But it was so nice to have something that moved further back in time, before Shakespeare, before Britain was Britain. And I don't know enough about the medieval period, so it was really refreshing to read something that was set during that time. I adored Sister Song, and I want it to get more attention, so if you like historical fiction and you haven't checked out Sister Song, please do. The Confessions of Fanny Langton. I've mentioned this multiple times in multiple videos, and I want to bring it up one more time here before I reread it and do a dedicated video on it, which is something I have planned at the back of my mind and I swear I will do at some point. I adore Sarah Collins, I adore this book. It is about to be a TV show. She has been tweeting about the updates, she wrote the screenplay for the TV show, actors have been cast. I love The Confessions of Fanny Langton. It is a wonderful piece of Black British historical fiction by an amazing woman writer. I've talked about it before, I will do a video on it. I'm not going to talk about the story at all here, wait for that video. But if you haven't read it already, The Confessions of Fanny Langton is everywhere and for good reason. It is worth your time. Elizabeth MacNeil is another great British woman writer of historical fiction. She has 2 novels out, The Doll Factory and Circus of Wonders, both of which are set during the 19th century. And I want to talk specifically about this one because it's the new one and it's the pretty hardback, although I have again already done a dedicated video on this, so please check that out if you're interested. Circus of Wonders tells the story of a woman who has a whole load of birthmarks on her body, and she lives in a small coastal town in England and is picked up by a circus. Very early on in the book, first chapter even, her father sells her to the circus, and she at first tries to escape their caravan and then thinks, shit, what am I escaping back to? My family sold me. I'm just going to make the best of this, and I'm going to find a home here, a life, a career, and that's exactly what she does, while slowly falling in love with the brother of the owner of the circus troupe. And those are our three main protagonists. The woman, I think her name is Nell, I can't remember now. I could check, the book's right here. I'm not going to check. Nell, I think it is. Toby and Jasper, I think that's right. Toby and Jasper are the owners of the circus, but it is Jasper's baby. Jasper is a very interesting kind of anti-protagonist. I don't want to call him a villain, but he's not a nice guy. And yet we have to follow his story, and it is a very enjoyable one. And then you've got Toby, and you've got Nell, and the two of them are slowly falling in love, while we also get flashbacks to when Toby and his brother were at war and how they got to where they are. It's a very engaging and very sweet tale. Elizabeth McNeil has a wonderful sense of writing. This is not just cookie-cutter historical fiction. This is exquisitely written poetic language that I really found myself captivated by from the very first page. She spends time carving out beautiful descriptions, beautiful lines of dialogue over and over again. Finally, I want to talk about two of my favorite women writers when it comes to historical fiction, and that is Laura Purcell, who is my absolute favorite author of historical fiction, and Stacey Halls, who writes very fun, sweet, simple, engaging, warm and homey, sit by the fireside kind of reads. Let's start with this so I don't crane my neck. This is The Corset. I have picked this pretty much at random. I also have behind me The Shape of Darkness, which was her fourth novel. This is her second novel. Somewhere behind the camera I've got a paperback of The Silent Companions, and then at my parents' house I have Bone China. I have all four of her books, and I love them so much. Every year she churns out a new incredible piece of gothic, horror, historical fiction. She also has this rhythm that she seems to have created, with The Silent Companions, her first book, being a very stripped down and beautiful, traditional, haunted house story. Her second book, The Corset, is a more psychological terror thriller kind of a thing. Her third book, Bone China, was back to the haunted house, and her fourth book, The Shape of Darkness, that red one there, being again kind of a psychological thriller terror thing. So she's gone from horror, terror, and I'm wondering what her fifth book will be. It's probably going to be a haunted house story. I love this. I don't know if she does it on purpose, but it's really great. I have The Corset here. It is considered to be her best book, I think. I've seen her tweet about how it is her favourite of her books that she's written, and I think typically people seem to consider it the most well-written of her books, and I'm not going to disagree. I think I enjoy reading and rereading The Silent Companions the most because I love haunted house stories. I think this and The Shape of Darkness are both exquisitely plotted, wonderfully plotted stories that really lean into the psychology of terror. And Bone China was basically The Silent Companions, but not as good. I shouldn't simplify it that much, but that's how I felt when I read it, although I was pretty sad when I read it. Maybe I should read it again. I read it when I was feeling particularly low. Anyway, The Corset is an exquisite book about a young woman who is a budding scientist in a science that isn't real, but at the time people thought it was, and she goes to a women's prison. She interviews a young woman who thinks that she has killed multiple people, and she wants to figure out if this young woman is inherently evil by measuring her skull. She thinks that brain size, brain shape, these things are connected to our innate sense of justice and our ability to do good or do bad. And then we get into the flashbacks of this young woman in the prison and what she did and why she thinks she has killed multiple people. Absolutely fascinating. We've got two protagonists, each of whom have a story worth telling but are very, very different people. And then we have the books of Stacey Halls. I have talked in a separate video about her other two books, The Familiars and The Foundling, which are behind me. Very worthwhile reads. The Foundling remains my favourite book of hers, but I haven't really talked about her third book, which came out recently, Mrs. England. This is a really delightful book. It doesn't push the boat out. It's not doing anything groundbreaking. It's not gothic or terror or horror. It's pretty simple stuff. It's very read by the fireside, as I said. It's a comfort read. It's almost simple escapism, and that very much has its place, and it's something that makes me continue to love the works of Stacey Halls. She's a very popular writer. She is beloved, and she is always on these bestseller lists. You find her books at Smith's and other popular booksellers. She's everywhere. And books that are everywhere, like the books of Matt Haig, I typically avoid because I want to talk about more underground stuff that is in translation, queer books, etc. etc. And this very much isn't any of that. This is a white British woman telling a white British story, and yet it's so delightful and warming, and I just enjoy it for how well it soothes me. It's like a cup of tea in book form. Mrs. England is gothic in a sense. You do have this kind of Rebecca / Jane Eyre / Wuthering Heights kind of a Bronte / du Maurier influence going on, but it never hits those really deep, dark tones and settings. It treads that ground while being a little bit sweeter, although it gets particularly dark towards the end. Her books are just comfort food. They really are. If you like historical fiction to be comfy and warm, that's exactly what this is. Alright, I'll leave it there. I have loads more historical fiction that I can talk about. I've written articles, I've done other videos, please check them out. But I really love historical fiction by women, and there is so much more for me to enjoy, and I'm going to keep checking it out and reporting on it whenever I find more to talk about. Good. Subscribe for books.